Hi, I'm Richard Rogers, and I absolutely hope that you enjoy today's spiritual message. You know, we at Unity of Phoenix Spiritual Center are committed to helping people live better lives. We're going to provide you tools over and over, spiritual tools that allow you to live your best possible life. And if you want to leave a donation to continue to allow the work that we do to support other people just like you, we say thank you. Thank you for your generosity, because this ministry is committed to making the world a better place.
So would you be willing to live a better life? Is that true? So I'm going to have to ask this again, because you know the right answer is yes, right? But I'm going to call you out a little bit right now. So would you really be willing to live a better life if it requires a level of transformation to get there? So then kind of the next question is, then what would it take? And then why aren't you? Well, I didn't want to go that far, but then, right? Because what I want you to see is in this brand new year, you get to completely define the parameters, right? So one of the focuses of our ministry is helping people live better lives, right? And if we dial it down even more, it's really helping spiritual people live better lives. True? Because how many of you consider yourself spiritual? Most, right? Most of you consider yourself spiritual. So it's about helping spiritual people live better lives. And so this month, I wanted to do a series on leveraging up. And what are those things that cause us to leverage up, right? What is that? Do you remember the quote from Archimedes? Do you remember that one? Really? Nobody remembers that one? Now I got to remember it, right? Thank you. Archimedes said, if you give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum and a place to stand, I can move the world. Does that make sense? So what does leveraging mean? Leveraging is the act of applying force to get lift, transformation, movement, right? So I want to be in a conversation this month about what creates leverage in your life. Now, from a financial point of view, if you're in finance, what does leverage mean? You know what it means to lever something or to leverage something, right? It means to borrow, usually to borrow, in such a way that you take the money that you have and you get more for it, right? So you can, instead of paying cash for a house, you get a mortgage, and that, it's easier than living in a box, right? Right? So the idea is that we're going to talk about those things that lift you higher than you're currently at, and what are those pressure points that actually cause lift? Because I think it's important to know what those pressure points are that cause lift. Because how many of you have ever tried something that simply didn't work? Right? How many of you in a spiritual context have tried something, maybe in the church that you grew up with, whatever, tried something and everybody said this is what you were supposed to do, and you did it and it was like, ho-hum. Like there was no bang for your buck. There was no benefit, and everybody said you had to do it, and you did it, and it was like, maybe it works for them, but it's not working for me. You know, Charles Fillmore, one of the things I love about Charles Fillmore, he says, don't do this because I say you should do it. Try it. That Unity's always had this focus on being practical Christianity. The idea, I want you to know what are the things that you can actually do in your life that move this in such a way that you feel that you've been lifted higher. Because I really believe that there's a desire in every soul to be lifted higher. How many of you have at least one thing in your life that you see right now could be better than it is right now? Right? I love that, right? So And when we apply spiritual principles to that and it works, we become more and more committed to it. And if it doesn't work, let's find out so we're not wasting time and energy. Right? So if I give you a spiritual principle and it, like, Richard, like, throw it out, because playing a bad game more often doesn't work. It doesn't help the game, right? Like, if you go to Vegas, speaking of bad games, if you go to Vegas, the longer you're there, the more chance you have to lose. Right? Because it's designed in the house's favor. It's a bad game. I want you to have things in your life that actually allow you to win and to increase the probability that you're going to win. Okay, you get where I'm going, right? You with me? Okay, so I want to just go back to last week for a second. If you were here last week, I presented this idea that the inside creates the outside, right? If you were here, do you remember that? And I said over and over again that what we teach is that the inner life, the inner world, creates the outer experience. And last week what I gave you was 3 feelings, and I'm going to call them feelings, 3 feelings, and I invited you to pick one and to take that feeling deep, to really practice that feeling, to allow yourself to see if you could feel that feeling, to see if you could feel that feeling more and more and more. And what I invited you to look at last week, the 3 feelings that I wanted you to look at, first one was self-love, or I also said happiness, and then I said value. Right? That's a you, value, right? And I said, I wanted you to, and this was really self-value, to be able to really value yourself. And I said, if you want to just pick one of those and work on that all year long, that I believe that that's going to create internal lift, right? If you work on every day being happier than you've ever been before, is that going to change your inner life? Yes. And what we believe is if you change your inner life, it's going to change your outer life. So happiness is one. And I just think I think on the inner life, these 3 are the big 3. Happiness, self-love, and value. So can you see that maybe you could do a better job with self-love? Right? And the same for value, how much you value yourself. Can you see that over and over again as you do your inner work in those 3 areas? And sometimes for me, it's just easier when we're not trying to do everything, right? That you really pick one and take it deep. So if you only got to work on one feeling or one inner quality for a whole year, can you imagine picking one of those and really doing a level of work that makes a difference? And last week I invited you to really pick one. You want to work on being happy? Oh, sorry. Would you be willing to be happier than you've ever been before? And can you imagine spending a whole year practicing being happier than you've ever been before? Would that just scare the heck out of your family? Right? If you got profoundly happier than you've ever been before, would they worry about you? Like, did they change this medication or what? Right? That you would just get happier, right? So that's what we focused on, and I'm still going to work on that one, right? I'm still inviting you to work on that one. So let's work on today. Because today what I want us to work on is power. Because if you look at this, right? Is this power? Does it take power to move this lever down so this goes up? Does it take power? Right. And what we know is, within reason, you can be so powerful that you could actually shoot this thing into outer space. But what we know is that the more powerful we are, the easier it is to make changes. True? Right? So I want to talk about power tonight. Well, I got low marks for marksmanship. All right? So I want to talk about power tonight because I want you to look at what are the moments that were the most empowering to you in your life? What are the moments where you became more empowered than you've ever been before? And I want you to see if there's a trend. And I want to share two of mine with you. One of the things that has been a challenge for me, especially in my early life, was the fear of heights. And you wouldn't think somebody who's 6'4" would be afraid of heights, right? When my kids were little, we went to Chicago. We went to the John Hancock building because, you're in Chicago. You got to go thing, right? And we all loaded up in the elevator and went to the top. And the doors of the elevator opened. Now, they were little. I mean, they were like 1 year and 3, or 2 and 4, somewhere in there. And they went out of the elevator. They were so excited. They went screaming, and if you've been there, they went screaming for the glass, all glass, no barriers, all glass wall. They went screaming for the glass wall just to see how far they could see. I love my kids. I do. I love my kids. I would almost do anything for my kids. I love them so much. As I got out of the elevator, I had a full-on panic attack that it was higher than I'd ever been before, and I freaked out. I was back up against the wall, and it was like, well, we'll have to create 2 more. Right? They were lost. They were gone. If that glass broke on them, I'm sorry. I loved you. You were great. We really had a great couple years together, and good luck. I'll see you next time around, right? Because there was no way I could literally leave more than just maybe a half a step beyond the farthest wall. And it was like finally I was able to kind of nudge, and I couldn't look down. I could not look down. I could kind of look out, but even if I kind of nudged my way there, I just couldn't do it, right? So one of the things I committed to do that year, because if some is good, too much is just about right, right? So I made a commitment that year to jump out of an airplane. Because I did, right? And at the time, this is many years ago, I was not as big as I am now, but I've always been a big guy, right? And when you jump out of an airplane with a tandem, there's a weight limit, right? Because there's a weight limit, right? And so they had to find somebody that our combined weight was under the limit. They found a person this big. Literally. When you tandem jump like that, they anchor you together, and then the parachute is on their back, right? So as we're walking down the plane, he can't touch the ground. Seriously, he cannot touch the ground. So I've got a man like a backpack on my back. And he's got the parachute on his back. So I'm trying onto the airplane, and his little feet are just wagging, right? They're like, God is my witness, right? Yes, God is my witness. So I get in the plane, and they go up, and they go up 13,000 feet. And it's down in Eloy. Has everybody ever been there? Has anybody ever jumped out of Eloy? When you get up to 13,000 feet, you can't see that little airport. I mean, literally, you can't find it, right? And so they say it's 13,000 feet. You're ready. The little buzzer goes off. The light starts to shine. You go to the door, and you have to decide, right? And I'm convinced I'm just going to die, right? So I jump, like I just jump. And I am screaming so loud, right? But they tell you in training that if you keep your mouth open, you can't really breathe because the force of the air coming up, your lungs fill up, your mouth is open, it's just going straight into your lungs, and you can't breathe because you have to be able to inhale and exhale to breathe. So I have to, I'm breathing so hard that I'm now screaming out of my nose. I didn't know you could do that, right? I literally did not know you could do that. So I'm screaming out of my nose. And then I'm so fixated on where that little airport is that the guy behind me reaches over and goes like this because he's afraid now that I've passed out. Right? Because when you get to like 2,500 feet is the ceiling about when you're supposed to pull the chute. So he goes like this and I realize, oh, it's time. And then I got to pull the thing and the chute comes up and they don't tell you, but imagine somebody taking the back of your pants and lifting you over a house. That's what it felt like. Literally, really it felt like they took your underwear and just lifted you over a house. And you have, the kids call it wedgie. Not that you needed, that was probably more information than you needed. But that was the experience. And I got to the ground and I kissed the ground. But from that day to this, I have never had a fear of heights again. Right? Let me tell you one more. Not as funny. Let me tell you one more. When I went to ministerial school, when I went to seminary, I was going to be a teen minister. And my first year, the person who taught homiletics, you know what homiletics is? It's how do you write and give a talk. And it's a different, it's the speech coach. But when you're in seminary, they can't say speech coach, so they have to call it a homiletic. So the homiletics instructor, my first year, was a minister by the name of Reverend Sally Taylor. Did anybody know Sally Taylor? Sally Taylor, fabulous, Sally Taylor. So after the first year, she took a ministry down in Austin, Texas. And I was working at the time with the teens throughout Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri. At the time, I was working there with the teens. And she invited me to come down and work with her teens in her church. And I had spoken a few times before I got to school, and it was always something I enjoyed, but it always scared me a great deal to speak into a group of people. It just was something I enjoyed and hated in the same experience. So I thought if I went to seminary, I could work with teens and I could work with kids, and I wouldn't ever have to get up and speak to people, because people are scary. They're just, when you speak to them, they're scary, right? So Sally invited me down, and I had spoken for Sally for a full year before she went down to Austin. So she went down to Austin, and she said, I want you to speak this Sunday. I want you to do a workshop for the kids this Sunday. And I said, great, I'll be happy to. So I went down there, had everything planned out for the workshop with the kids. She said, I want you to do the workshop at the first service. I said, great. Did the workshop for all the kids at the first service. And then she said, I'm not feeling well, I'm going home. And she said, I'd like you to speak at the second service. Now, I did not prepare a talk. There's things that I'd said, but I did not. Did you hear me say? I did not have a talk. And she left. And she said, he's going to speak at the 11 o'clock service. Now, at that point in Austin, Texas, the Unity Church had 500 people, standing room only, for their 11 o'clock service. It was their big dog, like it is here. It was their big service. And she left. And she said, he's going to do it. I thought, could I get a taxi to go to the airport? Right? And Sally said, I've heard you speak. You can do this, and I'm going to let you. And I got up and spoke, and I shared, because at the time I was doing a group at the hospital there in Kansas City, the pediatric hospital, with kids that were HIV positive. Because I was working with a group of kids and their parents that were hemophiliacs, and at the time in the late 80s, a lot of kids that had hemophilia were HIV positive because of the blood supply. And I just shared about this kid's life, one of the kids that I'd worked with, and what it was like to be HIV positive in the late 80s, and what he was going through and what his family was going through. And I just shared the story of that, and I shared how impactful and how that had changed my life, and how there was this thing going on in the world, and we could do something. We could be helpful. We could be in service, because people that are HIV positive needed support like never before. And at that time, I don't know if you remember the late 80s, but there was a lot of craziness about being HIV and being HIV positive. And I just told the story of that. And when I was done, I got a standing ovation. And I had never got a standing ovation before in a talk. And I didn't write a talk. I didn't have a talk. I just went in there and spoke from my heart, and it worked. And I really think that Sally she had planned this thing from the beginning, and she knew if she told me that I was going to speak at her 11 o'clock service, that I never would have got on the plane, right? But it changed my life, because I realized that day that that parents really did have longer attention spans than teenagers. Not much longer, but a little bit longer. And that I could actually do this. And at that moment, I kind of shifted, and I made a change because I was willing to do something. See, one of the things I want to talk about tonight is the fact that we believe that empowerment sometimes as spiritual beings comes from thinking and praying and contemplation. And what I really want you to see tonight is that to truly empower yourself, it has to be an action. It has to be something that you're willing to do that maybe you've never done before, or maybe something you don't want to do, or like have you ever worked out for like a month straight and felt so empowered because you actually went out and did it? Or maybe you've gone for something that you never thought physically you could do. And what I want you to see is that if we want to be more empowered, if we really want to leverage our life, talking about it is fabulous, or praying about it, or thinking about it, or believing we could do it. It's all well and good, but it's not until we actually do it that we feel empowered by it. You know, so, and it kind of makes sense in a weird kind of way, right? Because are you a spiritual being? Did you come to this world, to this three-dimensional form, to this experience, to think about life? I would say no. You didn't come to think about life. You actually came to live, right? So when you came into three-dimensional form, it was so that you could actually act and practice and be physical, because in the act of being physical, in the act of actually doing it, we feel more empowered. We feel that our life gets bigger. So there's an infinite potential within all of us. But it's not until we act, and it's not until we move it into the realm of three-dimensional form as a behavior, as an action, where it actually becomes empowering to the soul. Because we can think about it on the other side. You can spiritually know all the truth in the world on the other side. But you came into the world of form to live it. And it's not until we live it that it actually is empowering. Because we want to think about it, and because we think about it, it almost counts like we did it. But it doesn't count until you actually do it. So today, this week, this month, this year, what's one new behavior that you would actually be willing to do to empower your life? What's one thing that you would actually be willing to do so that that act of doing it empowers you to realize that there's more God in you? Now, I know that you could meditate on it. I know that you could think about it for another 100 years. But there's a difference between thinking about it or climbing up the stairs of the high dive, walking out the plank, and diving in. Is it more important to think about diving in the high dive or actually diving in the high dive? I suggest tonight that it's action. And I know it almost seems counterintuitive. Well, let's just think about it some more. Let's just pray about it some more. Let's just talk it to our support group about it some more. Or you could live it. Which would be more empowering to you? I'd like to suggest tonight that until it becomes an action, and especially an action that you repeat over and over and over again, you don't really own it. You may think you can do it. You may believe you can do it. You may wish you could do it. But I'd like to suggest that over and over again, the people that changed the world actually did it. Whether it was the 4-minute mile or Rosa Parks not giving up her seat, there was things over and over again that people actually did that empowered them and empowered all of us. So if you told yourself the truth, what's the one action? What's the one new action that if you incorporated that into this year, it would change you? So guess what your homework is? I'm going to invite you to spend more time in prayer this week. Just kidding. Right? I want you to be praying. But I'm not going to suggest tonight that we all go find a cave somewhere and meditate for 20 or 30 hours in a row. I want you to actually pick one new behavior. Maybe a new behavior that you've been knowing you want to do. Maybe it's something that you've been slightly afraid of. Maybe it's something that would actually change the way you live your life. To pick one new behavior and do that this year. So that you can actually see that you can do it. And then if you could do it once, does it make sense to you that you could do it twice? And if you can do it twice, would it make sense to you that it could actually become a habit? And if it became a habit, can you see that your life would become more empowered and bigger because you were consistently doing the things that your soul came to do? Because your soul came to do. It did. What's one thing? One thing that you'd be willing to do this year that is different than you've done before? Will you pray with me? I invite you to open your mind, your heart, your soul to the activity of God. And to commit that presence and that power, that life energy, that God energy into action. To be empowered by action. That it's not enough to no more just to say I can do it or wish I could do it or want to do it. It has to be an action. Tangible, real action that moves the world. In the name and through the power of the living Christ, we give thanks, and so it is. Amen.